The roar of the alien arena was deafening. Metal walls shook as 10,000 voices cried out for blood. The sky above the Colosseum burned with strange suns, casting red and gold light across the sand. In the center, gates began to rise. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to see the next victim. From the shadow of the gate, a figure stepped into the light. She was small, fragile, human. The audience burst into laughter. A towering reptilian fighter banged his chest with claws the size of daggers. His scales shimmered with green light. To him, the human girl was not a challenge. She was a joke. "Is this Earth's champion?" the announcer cried, his voice amplified across the arena. "The galaxy's weakest creature, made of brittle bones and soft skin. Watch closely, for this one will not last a minute." The laughter grew louder. Bets were placed in seconds. Nobody bet on her survival. Her name was Ilara. She stood quietly in the center, her eyes scanning the arena. She wore no heavy armor, no thick plating like her opponents. Only light fabric torn at the edges. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was sharp. The announcer lifted his claw. "Begin!" A horn blasted. The reptilian warrior lunged forward, shaking the ground. His shadow fell across Ilara. The audience screamed for her death. But she did not run. She waited, eyes fixed on the way his shoulder moved. The first strike came fast. His claw swung like a blade meant to cut her in two. Sand flew as the force shook the floor. The crowd cheered, then gasped. Ilara was not there. She had stepped aside at the last second, the claw missing her by inches. Her body moved like water, bending, slipping past the strike. The alien blinked, confused. This was not weakness. This was control. The crowd's laughter broke for a moment. Some leaned forward, curious. The reptilian growled, slamming his tail against the ground. Dust rose. He swung again, faster this time. Ilara ducked low, rolling beneath the strike. Her hands touched the sand, light and quick. She came up behind him, her eyes locked on the joints in his armor. With a sudden leap, she drove her fist into a gap beneath his arm. The strike was small, almost invisible compared to his massive size. But the reptilian staggered, hissing in pain. The crowd fell silent. A fragile human had drawn first blood. The alien turned, furious, claws dripping with his own dark blood. He roared and charged again. Ilara's chest heaved. She could feel her heartbeat pounding. Fear clawed at her mind, but she pushed it down. She had studied this. She had prepared. The alien brought his claws down to crush her skull. She raised her arms, bracing for impact. The claws slammed against her defense. Pain surged through her bones, but she did not fall. She twisted her body, slipping under his grip, and slashed at his exposed side with a blade hidden in her sleeve. A streak of blood sprayed across the sand. The crowd exploded with noise. The reptilian stumbled backward. His eyes widened. He had been struck twice by someone who should not have survived even one blow. He looked into her eyes and saw not fear but calculation. Ilara's breathing was sharp. Every muscle screamed, but her focus was absolute. She was not here to survive. She was here to win. The announcer's voice faltered. Unbelievable. The human still stands. The alien's fury turned into desperation. He roared and charged with all his weight, his claws ready to tear her apart. The arena floor shook under his steps. The crowd chanted for blood again, but Ilara did not move. She watched. She waited. Her eyes followed every step, every shift in his body. Then at the last second, she darted to the side, faster than any thought. The alien stumbled, his momentum carrying him into the wall. Stone cracked under the force. The audience gasped. Ilara stood calmly, her hand still raised in readiness. She was trembling inside, her body weak, but her will was iron. She knew she could not fight with strength. But she had something the others did not. She had patience. She had precision. The alien pulled himself from the wall, blood dripping from his jaw. His rage consumed him. He charged again, reckless now. Ilara saw her opening. She sprinted forward, closing the gap. Her small figure moved like a shadow under his massive frame. She struck at his knee joint with all her weight. A sickening crack echoed. The alien fell to one knee, howling. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed for her victory. Others demanded her execution. Ilara raised her blade, standing before the broken giant. The arena fell silent. Everyone waited for the end, but she did not strike. She looked up at the masters of the arena, her eyes steady. "This is the strength of humanity," she said, her voice carrying through the silence. "We are not fragile. We endure." The reptilian collapsed, unable to rise. The announcer's voice trembled. "The human wins." For a moment no one spoke. Then a wave of noise tore through the arena. Half the crowd screamed in fury. The other half chanted her name. Ilara stood in the center, her chest rising and falling. Her body shook with pain. But she had done the impossible, the smallest. The weakest, the human, had defeated a giant, and the galaxy had seen it. The arena floor was stained dark where the reptilian giant had fallen. His massive body lay motionless, his armor cracked, and his blood soaking into the sand. The crowd's voices clashed like thunder. Some screamed in fury that their champion had been humiliated by a human. Others, for the first time in history, cheered the name of a fragile species they had once mocked. Above, the overseers of the games whispered among themselves. Their metallic thrones glowed with alien light, their eyes fixed on the girl below. No one had expected her to last even a heartbeat. Now she stood victorious. Ilara's chest heaved as she fought for air. Her arms trembled. Every bone ached, but she forced herself to remain upright, blade at her side. She knew the arena was watching. Weakness would be remembered. Strength had to be displayed, even if she felt she could collapse at any moment. The announcer's booming voice filled the air. Unbelievable. The human stands victorious, but her trial is not over. The blood of the sand demands more. The crowd erupted in a chant. Again, again, again. The gates began to rise once more. The horn blared. A new opponent emerged. This one was different. Lean, long-limbed, his skin shimmered like black glass. Venom dripped from his fangs. His eyes glowed a cruel yellow. The announcer shouted his name, a hiss that made the audience shiver. "Ka, the serpent of Valin." Ka's tongue flicked as he tasted the air. He smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Fragile little thing," he hissed, his voice carrying even without the arena's amplification. "The first one underestimated you." "I will not." Ilara's heartbeat quickened. She knew this fight would be worse. The reptilian was brute strength. This one was speed and poison. She tightened her grip on her blade. The horn sounded again. Ka blurred into motion. He was a streak of black against the red sand. His claws sliced the air where Ilara had stood a moment before. She had barely managed to roll aside. The crowd cheered the speed of the strike. Ilara forced herself up, dust filling her throat. Ka circled her like a predator. His movements were sharp, precise, and fast. He struck again, his tail whipping forward like a spear. Ilara dodged, but the tip grazed her arm. Fire burned in her veins. Poison. She clenched her jaw. Her arm numbed instantly, the blade slipping from her fingers. She grabbed it with her other hand, switching grips. The crowd saw her falter and howled with delight. Ka laughed, a hissing sound. Soft flesh, weak veins. The poison will take you soon, but Ilara's eyes remained sharp. She had studied this too. She remembered hours of reading alien records, memorizing weaknesses. The serpent of Valin was fast, but he overextended his strikes. And his venom sacs were vulnerable. If one could get close enough, she forced herself to stand tall, hiding the tremor in her body. Ka lunged again, claws flashing. Ilara sidestepped, barely escaping, but his tail lashed out and cut her side. Blood spilled bright red against the sand. The crowd roared louder. Ilara stumbled back, pressing a hand against the wound. Pain stabbed through her ribs. Her vision blurred, but she focused on Ka's movements, fast, repetitive, predictable if studied. He rushed again, confident in her weakness. At the last moment, Ilara dropped low, sliding under his leap. Her blade slashed upward, striking across his underbelly. Black ichor sprayed into the air. Ka screeched in fury. The crowd gasped. Her human had cut the serpent. Ilara's chest heaved. Her poisoned arm burned. Her side bled freely, but her eyes stayed locked on him. She whispered to herself, steadying her breath. One mistake. Just one. Ka's rage consumed him. He struck wildly now, his speed turning reckless. Ilara dodged left, then right, each move slower as her body weakened. She staggered, her knees threatening to give way. The serpent hissed in triumph and leapt for her throat. Ilara waited. She had studied the angle. She had measured his reach. At the very last second, she stepped forward instead of back. His fangs snapped shut where her neck had been. She drove her blade upward into the soft flesh beneath his jaw. The strike pierced deep. Venom poured from the wound, mixing with his blood. Carr convulsed, screeching, his body thrashing in pain. Ilara held on, forcing the blade deeper. At last he collapsed to the ground, twitching once, then going still. Silence fell over the arena. The human had killed the serpent. Ilara stood above the corpse, drenched in blood, her body shaking with exhaustion. She raised her blade weakly but defiantly. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed for her to be crowned champion. Others demanded she be torn apart for daring to shame the great warriors of the galaxy. Above, the overseers' faces were unreadable. But one thing was clear. Ilara had become more than a curiosity. She was now a threat. The announcer's voice cracked as he shouted, "The human stands again." She bleeds. She suffers. But she will not fall. Is this fragility? Or is this the terror of endurance? The audience chanted louder and louder, their voices shaking the walls. Ilara stood in the center of it all, her blood dripping into the sand. Her vision blurred, her knees weak, but she did not collapse. She whispered through clenched teeth, a vow meant for herself, but carried by the silence of the crowd. No one defeats a human. The gates began to rise once more. The arena had decided. She was not done. The arena floor was still wet with dark blood where Carr had fallen. His black body twitched no more. The serpent of Veilin, a predator feared across 5 systems, had been defeated by the weakest species in the galaxy. By a human. The crowd could not decide whether to cheer or to riot. Some pounded their chests and shouted for Ilara's name. Others clawed the air in rage, demanding her head. The noise was a storm, rolling over the arena like thunder. Ilara stood in the center of it all. Her side bled. Her arm was numb from venom. Her throat was dry, and her lungs burned with every breath. She knew her body was breaking. But her eyes stayed steady, fixed on the gate ahead. The arena was not finished with her. The announcer's voice cut through the roar. Twice she has stood. Twice she has bled. Twice she has survived. But can fragility withstand the storm of knowledge? Bring forth the scholar of blades. The gate rose. From the shadows stepped a new fighter. Not a giant beast, not a venomous serpent, but a tall, thin alien clad in dark silver armor. His movements measured and calm. His skin shimmered blue, his head crowned with sharp ridges that glowed faintly. In his hands 2 blades hummed with energy. The crowd hushed. They knew this one. A master strategist, a killer of hundreds. Not raw power, not poison, but skill. Ilara felt her stomach tighten. This would not be like the others. He would not underestimate her. The announcer spread his claws. Behold Rethar of the Veil. He has studied every anatomy of war, every weakness of every species. And now he studies the human. Rethar's gaze fell on her, cold, calculating. He moved with silence, his blades crossing before him in a salute. Then he spoke, his voice calm and cutting. You should not have won. You survived by luck, but luck cannot save you now. Ilara did not answer. Her voice would only waste the air she needed. She lifted her blade, though her hand trembled. The horn sounded. Rethar moved like a shadow, his twin blades flashing in patterns too fast for the eye to follow. Each strike was precise, aiming not for death but for testing, probing, studying her movements. Ilara blocked once, then twice, but the third cut grazed her shoulder, burning as the energy blade sliced fabric and flesh. The crowd cheered at the first blood. Ilara stumbled back. She knew she could not match his skill head to head, but she had studied anatomy too. She had learned not the way of swords, but the way of bodies. Every species had weaknesses. Every joint, every artery, every breath had its rhythm. Rethar circled her, his movements like a dancer's. His strikes came again, faster now. Ilara ducked low, her weakened arm barely lifting her blade in time. Sparks flew as metal met energy. Pain shot up her arm, but she refused to drop the weapon. Rethar smiled. "You fight with pain, admirable but predictable." He struck again, cutting her across the leg. Ilara fell to one knee. The crowd roared in triumph. Rethar raised his blades high for the finishing blow. Ilara's eyes locked on his stance. She saw it, the smallest shift, the faintest gap in the plates of his armor where his heartbeat pulsed. She whispered to herself, steady and cold, "There!" As his blades came down, she rolled forward inside his guard. Her blade shot upward, not to his chest, not to his throat, but to that single small gap beneath his arm, where the veins converged. The strike sank deep. Rethar froze, his blade stopping mid-swing. His eyes widened in shock. He staggered back, dropping one weapon, clutching his side as dark blood poured from the wound. The arena gasped. Ilara stood again, weak and bleeding, but her eyes were sharp as fire. Every giant falls. Every master bleeds. No one is untouchable. Rethar tried to strike once more, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled. He fell face first into the sand, his blades vanishing into silence. The crowd erupted in madness. The announcer's voice shook. 3 champions, 3 legends, and still she stands. The human has mastered the anatomy of victory. Above, in the high thrones, the overseers leaned forward. Their voices overlapped in hushed tones. This was no longer a spectacle. This was dangerous. A human was proving not only survival, but dominance. Ilara's vision blurred. She could barely feel her hands. Her blood painted the sand around her feet. But she refused to fall. She had studied them. She had struck true, and she had won again. She lifted her blade weakly, pointing it at the overseers. "You mock fragility, but fragility learns. Fragility endures, and fragility kills." The arena fell into silence. For the first time, fear crept into the voices of the crowd. The arena sand was stained with layers of blood. Red from Ilara, black from Ka, dark violet from Rethar. 3 warriors had fallen, and still the small human stood. The crowd no longer laughed. They shouted, they argued, they fought among themselves. Some demanded she be given glory. Others screamed that she be crushed before humans became a legend. Up in the high towers, the overseers whispered with sharp voices. These were not spectators. These were rulers, each representing powerful alien houses. Their faces glowed with unease. "This should not have happened," hissed one. "A trick of chance," said another, though his voice lacked conviction. "She makes them bleed. If she wins again, others will begin to believe. We cannot allow belief. If humans are seen as strong, they will rise." The overseer of the game slammed his claw against the railing. "Then we break her. No more one-on-one. The crowd wants a spectacle. Give them one." The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. 3 champions have fallen, but the arena is merciful no longer. The human will face 2 at once. Let us see if her fragile body can endure the storm. The crowd roared. Some in joy, others in anger, but all hungry for blood. The gates opened. From the left came a brute with 4 arms, skin like stone, carrying a hammer that glowed with heat. From the right slithered a thin creature with translucent skin, its veins glowing with venom, its fingers ending in hooked claws. The announcer shouted their names, his voice like thunder. Grath the Breaker, Zeal the Poisoned Shadow. Together they will crush the illusion of humanity. Ilara's stomach tightened. Her body screamed with pain already. 3 battles had torn her to the edge, and now 2 at once. She gripped her blade tighter, forcing her hands to stop trembling. The horn blasted. Grath charged first, his hammer swinging wide. The ground cracked where it landed, the shockwave knocking Ilara off her feet. She rolled, barely avoiding the crushing blow. Gilles darted forward, claws slashing for her throat. Ilara twisted, the claws cutting her arm instead. The crowd screamed in delight, blood poured fresh down her skin. Her vision spun, but her mind stayed clear. She could not fight them both head-on. She had to make them fight each other. She staggered to her feet, dodging another hammer strike. Sand exploded where she had stood. Grath roared in frustration, his huge frame slow to recover. Ilara darted toward Zeal, making it seem like she meant to strike. Zeal hissed, claws slashing. Ilara ducked low. Behind her, Grath swung his hammer again. This time, Zeal was in the way. The hammer caught the serpent-like fighter on the shoulder, sending him flying into the wall with a sickening crunch. The crowd gasped, then laughed and cheered at the accident. Zeal screeched, rage twisting his glowing veins. "Fool!" he spat, striking at Grath. His venomous claws cut into the giant's stone-like flesh. Grath howled, slamming his hammer down at the smaller fighter. Ilara stumbled back, panting. Her gamble was working. Their fury was no longer aimed only at her. The two fighters clashed in the center, hammer against claws, venom against strength. The arena shook with their battle. The crowd shouted with madness, half for Grath, half for Zeal. Ilara watched, calculating. Her vision blurred, her knees weak, but she forced her mind to stay sharp. Every motion was a chance. Every strike revealed weakness. Zeal leapt onto Grath's back, driving claws into his neck. Grath roared, spinning, slamming his body against the wall to crush him. Both staggered, wounded, and enraged. This was her moment. Ilara sprinted forward, her blade flashing. She struck first at Zeal, slicing deep across his glowing veins. Venom spilled onto the sand, burning where it touched. Zeal screamed, falling to the ground, writhing. Grath turned to strike her, but his wounded body was slow. Ilara ducked beneath his hammer, rolling between his legs. She came up behind him and drove her blade into the back of his knee. The giant fell with a roar, his hammer crashing uselessly into the sand. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some shouted in awe, others in fury. Zeal crawled forward, his veins bursting with glowing poison, his claws reaching for Ilara. She turned, raising her blade. With one swift motion, she cut across his throat. His body went still. Grath tried to rise, but his leg buckled. Ilara climbed his back, every muscle screaming with pain. She gripped her blade with both hands and drove it deep into the side of his neck. The giant groaned once, then collapsed face first into the sand. Silence fell. Two fighters. Two monsters, both dead, and the human still stood. Ilara staggered, her body nearly broken, her blood soaking her clothes. She could barely breathe, barely see, but she raised her blade high. The crowd exploded with sound. Some shouted her name, others cursed her existence. The overseers above leaned forward, their eyes filled with something new. Not laughter, not curiosity, fear. The announcer's voice trembled as he spoke. Against two she still endures. Against giants and shadows she still kills. This human, this fragile thing, has defied the arena itself. Ilara's knees shook, but she forced herself to remain standing. She looked up at the overseers. "You can send them all, but we are not prey. We are human." The crowd roared again, shaking the Colosseum, and for the first time in the long history of the arena, the overseers felt doubt. The arena floor was silent except for the sound of Ilara's breath. Heavy, ragged, painful. She stood in the middle of the sand, blood soaking her arms and legs, her blade shaking in her grip. Around her the corpses of Grath, the Breaker, and Zeal. The poisoned shadow lay broken. The crowd did not laugh anymore. They stared. Some shouted her name, others spat curses, but all of them stared. For the first time in the long history of the Colosseum, the word human was no longer a joke. It was a threat. High in the overseer's box, the masters of the games sat in silence. They had designed these matches to humiliate her. Instead, she had humiliated them. The overseer with the iron mask broke the silence. "She should be dead." "She is not," another whispered. "Then she cannot be allowed to live much longer." Ilara did not hear them. She only heard her own heartbeat. She was close to collapsing. Her body was screaming to give in, but she refused. Every eye was on her. She had to stand. The announcer's voice was quieter this time. No thunder, no joy, only unease. The human stands again. 4 battles, 4 victories. And the blood of champions runs into the sand. The crowd erupted, not in laughter, but in divided chaos. "She is a demon," one shouted. "No, she is hope." cried another. Fragile flesh cannot be this strong. She fights with her mind, with her spirit. The noise shook the arena. For the first time, other fighters waiting in the shadows began to whisper. Beasts of iron, scaled warriors, hunters with claws, creatures bred for killing. They looked at each other, then at the small human girl, and in their alien eyes a new thing appeared. Fear, the hook. Fear takes root. The next morning, across the city built around the arena, whispers spread like fire. Taverns buzzed with rumors. A human defeated the serpent. A human killed the breaker. Children imitated her movements with sticks in the streets. Enslaved species, long broken by the overseers, repeated her name in secret, as if it were a weapon. The overseers tightened security. Patrols doubled. Anyone caught speaking of the human was beaten. But it did not stop the whispers. No one defeats a human. The words spread from mouth to mouth. In the dark cells of the arena, Ilara sat alone, her body wrapped in crude bandages, her skin hot with fever from poison and wounds. She could barely lift her head, but when she closed her eyes, she remembered every face in the crowd. She remembered the moment the silence fell, when even the strongest had stared at her in fear. That was her true weapon. Not the blade, not her fragile strength, fear. The gates opened again. The announcer's voice shook as he spoke. The next trial begins, but hear this. If she falls, she will fall hard. If she stands, then perhaps... None of us are safe. Two more fighters entered. One carried a spear tipped with plasma. The other wielded chains that crackled with energy. Both sneered at her, but their eyes betrayed them. They had watched her kill champions. They knew she was dangerous. Ilara pushed herself to her feet. Every movement was agony. She coughed blood into the sand. But she smiled, a broken smile. One that said, "I am still here." The horn blasted. The spear wielder struck first, his weapon flashing toward her heart. Ilara moved slow, slower than before, but she shifted just enough that the spear only cut her side. The pain was sharp, but she ignored it. She stepped closer, too close for his long weapon to strike again. Her blade cut his arm. He hissed and stumbled back. The chains lashed toward her, wrapping around her leg. Electricity surged through her body. She screamed, but used the momentum to roll forward, dragging the chain user off balance. The spear wielder came again, thrusting fast. Ilara twisted, the spear grazing her shoulder. She forced herself to focus. Pain was nothing. Pain was her ally. She gripped the chain wrapped around her leg, yanked hard, and pulled the second fighter into the spear's path. The crowd gasped as the spear pierced his own ally. The chain wielder fell, choking, blood spilling from his chest. The spear fighter froze for a heartbeat in horror. That was all she needed. Ilara lunged, her blade driving into his throat. He collapsed beside his ally, both dead on the sand. The arena was silent again. The announcer did not speak. His voice failed him. The overseers did not clap. The crowd shifted uneasily. And then, from somewhere in the stands, a single voice shouted, "No one defeats a human." The words echoed. Others repeated them. Then dozens. Then hundreds. "No one defeats a human. No one defeats a human." The chant thundered through the arena, shaking the walls. The overseers stood, shouting for silence, but the crowd ignored them. The slaves, the free, the traders, everyone shouted together. Ilara raised her blade, blood dripping down her arms, her body trembling. But her eyes were alive with fire. She whispered, almost to herself, but carried by the roar around her, "You will fear us. All of you." The crowd's chant grew louder. The overseers retreated into the shadows, and the galaxy's most ancient arena had been changed forever. The arena sand was still stained red from the last battle when the overseers dragged Ilara back to her cell. Her body hung limp in their grip, her wounds barely closed, with rough patches of alien medicine. They did not speak to her. They did not mock her. For the first time since her capture, they carried her in silence, as if afraid that even words might feed her strength. The iron gate slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her. She lay on the cold floor, trembling, coughing blood into her hand. Her body begged her to stop, to rest, to give in, But Ilara's mind would not stop replaying the chant. No one defeats a human. The words had not come from her lips. They had come from the people, from the very ones who had once mocked her. That chant was more dangerous than any blade, and she knew the overseers were terrified of it. Across the city, the words spread like wildfire. In the taverns, traders whispered, "The fragile one bleeds yet kills. The fragile one cannot be broken." In the slave pens, the beaten repeated the chant in low voices when the guards could not hear. Children carved crude drawings of her face on walls. The overseers tried to silence it. Patrols beat those who spoke her name. Execution pits filled with corpses of anyone who dared to chant. But still it spread, because whispers are harder to kill than bodies. In the high chamber of the arena, the overseers argued, "She cannot fight again. If she fights, the crowd will only grow louder. Then we kill her in secret. No! If she dies unseen, the people will believe she was greater than she was. Then what? How do we end her without making her a martyr?" They argued for hours, but no answer came. For every moment she lived, her legend grew. Ilara sat against the wall, her body weak, but her mind sharper than ever. She heard the guards outside whispering, too afraid to say her name aloud, but too curious to stay silent. "She looks broken, and yet she rises. I saw her cut the serpent's throat with one strike. Be quiet. If the masters hear..." But it was too late. Fear had already infected them. Ilara smiled faintly in the darkness. Her body was fragile, yes, but her will was iron, and iron bends the galaxy. The horns sounded again. The gate opened. Ilara staggered out, each step heavy. She gripped her blade, though her hand shook. Across the arena, 3 fighters entered together. Hulking beasts, armored in plates, each larger than 10 men. The announcer's voice tried to sound powerful, but cracked with strain. "3 champions against 1 human," the crowd murmured. The slaves in the upper cages shouted, "No one defeats a human." Guards tried to drown them out, beating drums. The beasts charged. Ilara did not wait. She ran forward, not at them, but at the ground between them. Her fragile body was fast, faster than their heavy armor. She slid low, slicing one beast's tendon as she passed. The giant roared and fell to one knee. The second beast swung a hammer the size of her body. She ducked beneath it, the wind of its swing nearly crushing her. She leapt, climbing onto its arm, running up its shoulder and driving her blade into its eye. The third beast caught her with a backhand. The strike slammed her into the wall. Her ribs cracked. Pain shot through her chest. The crowd gasped, thinking she was done. But Ilara pushed herself up, coughing blood, smiling through broken teeth. She lifted her blade again. The wounded beast roared, rushing her in rage. She sidestepped, using its momentum. It slammed into the other, the 2 giants colliding with bone-crushing force. She drove her sword deep into the fallen one's throat. The last beast, the hammer-wielder, roared in fury. He swung again and again. Ilara was slower now. Each dodge cut her flesh, but she waited. She endured, and when his hammer stuck deep in the wall, for 1 second too long, she struck. Her blade slid across his neck. He fell. 3 giants dead, 1 human standing. The arena fell into silence. Then, like thunder rolling across the stars, the chant began again. No one defeats a human. This time it was not whispered. This time it was screamed. Tens of thousands of voices. Slaves, citizens, even some guards joining in. The overseers fled from the stands the galaxy had seen. That night riots erupted. Slaves refused to bow. Chains were broken. Patrols were ambushed. Across the empire, hidden transmissions carried her name. The human still stands. In the deep mines of Raul, workers laid down their tools. In the prisons of Krath, the chained began to chant. On warships, enslaved crewmen looked their masters in the eye without fear. 1 spark had been enough. Ilara was that spark. "She is not a fighter anymore," one overseer whispered. "She is a fire, and fire cannot be chained." "Then we must unleash the warden," the others went silent. The warden was the overseer's last weapon. Not a fighter, but a monster built for killing entire armies. A beast no slave had ever seen and lived to tell. If the warden kills her in front of all, the fire will die with her. They agreed. The next match was set. Alone in her cell, Ilara felt her body failing. Every breath was pain, every wound burned. But when she closed her eyes, she did not see death. She saw faces, faces of those who had chanted for her, faces of the enslaved who had believed for the first time in their lives that freedom was possible. She whispered to the darkness, not as a warrior, but as a promise. No one defeats a human, and even in the silence of her cell, the words echoed back, as if the galaxy itself was listening. The cell was silent, except for the sound of dripping water and Ilara's slow, uneven breathing. Her body was a map of bruises, cuts, and burns. Her ribs ached when she moved. Her arms shook when she tried to lift the crude blade the overseers had returned to her. Yet in her mind, the noise of the crowd still thundered. No one defeats a human. That chant had followed her back into the darkness. Even here, she could still feel it echoing in her bones. It was not a cheer. It was not a joke. It was belief. And belief was the one thing the overseers could not chain. But belief was dangerous. For her, for everyone. Across the alien city, the chant became a whisper passed from mouth to mouth. Merchants repeated it quietly when overseers walked by. Children scratched the words into walls. In the slave pens, voices carried the phrase through the bars like a prayer. The overseers tried to crush it. Patrols stormed the markets, dragging away anyone who dared say the word human. Soldiers marched through the slave blocks, beating those who whispered. Fires burned in the night where rebels had been. Hanged, but still the whispers survived. No one defeats a human, even the guards. Posted outside Ilara's cell, muttered it in low voices when they thought no one listened. One guard whispered, "I saw her cut down 3 giants. She is not flesh. She is fury." Another spat. "She is weakness pretending to be strength." But then his voice lowered, uncertain. "Then why do you tremble when you speak of her?" The silence between them answered. Fear had taken root, and fear was spreading. In the high chamber above the arena, the overseers gathered. Their iron masks reflected the glow of the torches as they shouted at each other. "She has become a disease," one hissed. "She should have died in the sand. Instead, she grows stronger with every match. If we kill her now, the crowd will riot. If we let her live, the fire will spread beyond this world." The eldest overseer slammed his clawed hand onto the table. The sound echoed like thunder. "Then we will burn the fire out." One more match. But this time she faces the warden. At the mention of the name, the chamber fell silent. Even among the overseers, the warden was a shadow that carried dread. "Yes," the elder said. "Let the galaxy watch her hope die." The horn sounded again. Her cell door groaned open. Ilara stumbled forward, dragging her blade, her body screaming to collapse. The guards pushed her toward the light of the arena. The announcer's voice cracked as he spoke. The human faces, 3 champions. Let the sand drink her weakness. 3 enormous figures stepped into the arena. Their bodies were armored in steel and bone, their weapons glowing with deadly power. The crowd gasped at the sight. Ilara coughed blood into the sand, but smiled through her broken teeth. Weakness was her mask, and her mask was fear. The beasts charged. The first giant swung a hammer that could crush a starship hull. Ilara rolled aside, the ground shaking where it struck. She darted forward, fragile but fast, and cut deep into his leg. The giant roared, stumbling. The second lashed at her with hooked chains, electricity sparking from the tips. They wrapped around her arm, searing her flesh. She screamed, but instead of retreating, she yanked hard, pulling the chain wielder toward her. He stumbled, and the giant hammer caught him instead of her. His body shattered under the blow. The crowd gasped. Ilara staggered back, her skin burned, her body trembling. The third beast, plated in iron, charged her. She waited until the last instant, then dropped to one knee. The beast's momentum carried it past her, straight into the wounded hammer-bearer. The 2 colossi crashed together. Ilara lunged, driving her blade into the exposed neck of the hammer-bearer. He fell, choking on his own blood. The iron-plated warrior turned, roaring in fury. He smashed her against the wall, ribs snapping. Pain blinded her. Blood filled her mouth. But even then, She smiled. With her last strength, she jammed her blade into the gap of his armor at the throat. He fell heavy onto the sand, his blood joining the others. Ilara collapsed to her knees, her blade trembling in her hand. The crowd stared in silence. Then, from the highest cages of slaves, a voice cried out, "No one defeats a human." The crowd erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in a chant that shook the walls. No one defeats a human. No one defeats a human. Tens of thousands of voices thundered together. The overseers fled their seats. The announcer said nothing. The guards hesitated at the gates, fear in their eyes. Ilara raised her blood-stained blade, and though she could barely stand, her voice carried across the sand. "You will remember this. You will all remember. A human does not kneel." The chant grew louder. That night the city burned. Slaves rose against their masters. Chains were broken. Overseers' patrols were ambushed in alleys. Traders spread the story across the stars, carrying whispers of the human who defied death. In the deep mines of Ral, workers laid down their tools and sang the chant. In the prisons of Krath, captives carved the words into the walls. On distant ships, enslaved crewmen lifted their eyes against their masters. The overseers tried to silence it with fire and blade. But fire cannot kill fire. The spark had become a blaze. Ilara lay in her cell, her body broken but her spirit alive. She could barely lift her head. Every breath was agony. But when she closed her eyes, she did not see the arena. She saw stars. And in those stars, millions of voices chanting together. No one defeats a human. For the first time since her capture, Ilara smiled without pain, because she knew the overseers had already lost. They just did not know it yet. The arena floor was black with blood and fire. Bodies of beasts, soldiers, and broken machines lay scattered in the sand. Above the chaos, the warden still stood, taller than any fighter before. A monster of steel and flesh, its eyes burning with red fury, and before it, a single figure still rose from the dust. Ilara, her body was shattered. Her arm hung useless at her side, her ribs cracked, her face a mask of blood. She leaned on her blade just to stay standing. Every breath was pain. But her eyes burned brighter than the monsters. Around her the crowd had gone silent. Tens of thousands held their breath, waiting to see if the fragile human could stand against the overseer's greatest weapon. The warden roared, a sound that shook the walls and rattled bones. Chains of fire uncoiled from its arms, slashing the ground where Ilara stood. She leapt aside, rolling across the sand, barely dodging the blaze. The announcer's voice trembled as he spoke, almost whispering. "This is the end." The overseer's fury unleashed, but the crowd did not echo him. They waited. Their silence was heavier than thunder. The warden charged. Every step shook the ground. Ilara's legs wobbled beneath her, but she raised her blade. She knew she could not win by strength. She could not win by speed. Her body was too broken. She could only win by will. The warden's chains lashed at her. One caught her across the back, tearing flesh. She screamed but did not fall. The second wrapped her ankle, dragging her across the sand. Her fingers clawed at the ground, searching, until they closed around a shard of broken steel. As the warden lifted her into the air, Ilara hurled the shard into its eye. The monster roared, dropping her. She crashed into the sand, ribs screaming with fire. But she forced herself up again, coughing blood, standing taller than before. The crowd gasped. Even the guards leaned forward, eyes wide. She was not supposed to rise, but she did again. From the highest cages, a slave's voice broke the silence. "No one defeats a human." Then another joined, and another, until the chant shook the air, tens of thousands crying out together. "No one defeats a human. No one defeats a human." The overseers shouted for silence. Their soldiers struck the chanters, but the chant only grew louder. Even some guards joined in, their voices breaking from fear into belief. The warden turned, confused by the sound, its gaze flicking to the crowd. That was all Ilara needed. She ran, every step agony, every breath fire, and climbed the chains dragging from its arms. The warden roared, trying to shake her off. but she clung like a shadow, climbing higher, until she reached the monster's chest. With a final cry, she drove her blade deep into the crack of its armor, straight into the core that pulsed with red light. The warden screamed, its body shaking, its chains flailing wildly. Then it fell. The ground shook as the overseer's greatest weapon collapsed into the dust. Ilara slid down its body, her blade still in hand. She landed on her knees, barely able to breathe. But she lifted her face to the crowd. "I told you," she whispered, though the whole arena seemed to hear her. "No one defeats a human." The crowd exploded. That night the city burned brighter than ever. Slaves tore down their chains. Overseers were dragged from their towers. Soldiers threw down their weapons and joined the rebellion. Across the galaxy, the story spread faster than any fleet. Transmission waves carried her name from system to system. On distant worlds, prisoners rose. On warships, enslaved crew mutinied. The Overseer's empire, built on fear, now drowned in it, because one fragile human had shown the galaxy that even the weakest could not be broken. In the high chamber, the last Overseers gathered, their iron masks cracked, their voices filled with panic. "This was supposed to be a spectacle," one hissed. "This was supposed to be her death," another spat. Instead, outside their walls, the chant thundered louder than ever. "No one defeats a human." The Overseers looked at one another, and for the first time in their long reign, they understood. Their age was over. Ilara did not see the riots. She did not hear the Overseer's screams. She lay in the sand of the arena, her body failing, her strength gone. But as the stars wheeled above her, she smiled. She had not fought to live. She had fought to show the galaxy that humans could not be mocked, could not be crushed, could not be defeated. Her eyes closed. The world faded. But the chant did not fade with her. "No one defeats a human." It echoed through the arena, through the city, through the stars. A phrase that would outlive her. A phrase that would become a blade in every slave's hand, a shield in every rebel's heart. And in that moment, Ilara was no longer just one fragile girl. She was the spark that burned an empire. She was the proof that humanity was unbreakable. She was the whisper the galaxy would never silence. No one defeats a human.